Welcome back, everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about, I guess, what my worst iPhone I ever owned was. Now, this is a tricky question because any iPhone I've ever used, to be honest, at least as my main device, it really wasn't that bad of an experience. Every single iPhone I've owned for the most part had a tremendous impact, and it was a pretty big upgrade coming from the predecessor. So every single iPhone I've ever owned, including starting off with my 6 Plus, and then I switched up to a 6S Plus, then a 7 Plus, to a 10, to a 10, to an 11 Pro, to the 12 Pro that I have now. They've all been tremendous phones, so none of them have been bad. But there was one iPhone that was the least impactful and probably the smallest upgrade going from one generation to the other that I've personally used. And that was probably, it's gonna sound crazy, my iPhone 12 Pro. I think this was probably, not the worst iPhone. If I had to say it was the worst iPhone in terms of impact, I mean, there's very little difference between an 11 Pro and my 12 Pro. And quite possibly if I used an iPhone XS, I never used it as a main device, but if I were to, I'm sure that would probably be up there as well. But the 12 Pro is probably the least impactful iPhone I've ever used, to be completely honest, because I went from a 6 Plus to a 6S Plus, massive difference there. 6S Plus to a 7 Plus, massive difference there. 7 Plus to an iPhone 10, the biggest difference probably in my opinion. Then the 10 to an 11 Pro, which also had a humongous impact and a humongous difference. And now at the 12 Pro, honestly, the size, I like the size increase, I like these things, but this is probably one of the smallest impacts, probably one of the worst impacts going from one iPhone to the other from what I've personally used. Now, the biggest problem I experienced with my iPhone 12 Pro that I still experience time to time is the battery life. For some reason, and I'm not too sure why, the battery life on my 12 Pro just never seemed to be better than my 11 Pro. With my 11 Pro, I could use it all day and I wouldn't have to worry about it because I kind of knew what I was going to end the day off with, typically around 50-60%, throughout the whole entire day of usage. Now, it seems like with my 12 Pro, I'm ending the days off with like 30-40%, and on top of that, it's very unpredictable. Sometimes they may end it off with like 50%, the other day maybe 30% on the exact same usage, so it really doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not 100% too sure why that happens, but that is one aspect of it. Another aspect is that I'm still experiencing a lot of glitches on my 12 Pro. So I'm not really too sure what's going on there. I've updated it. I haven't really talked about it as much because it's not that big of a deal. There are little minor things, but I still experience them. Whereas on my 11 Pro and all my other iPhones, for the most part, it was a fairly smooth experience, for the majority of time I was using it. But on top of that, and this is another major thing, with phones like the 11 Pro, the 10, and the 12 Pro, there are so many similarities that even if I go from the iPhone 10 to the 12 Pro, I'm sure that difference is going to be almost exactly the same as the 10 to the 11 Pro. The performance feels almost exactly the same. The speed feels exactly the same. The updates, everything else. I mean, I really don't see that big of a difference. The only main differences is that we now have flat sides versus the, rounded sides. So it's not a bad iPhone. It's not a horrible iPhone or anything like that. But in terms of impact and in terms of, the feeling that I have, like maybe I did waste $1,000 getting this phone going from an 11 Pro to the 12 Pro. This is probably the least impactful, maybe the worst iPhone in terms of the whole entire lineup I've owned. But again, I truly do think that if I owned the iPhone XS and I use that as a main device, I probably would have said the same thing about that device. But because I use the 12 Pro currently right now, this is probably one of those devices I would consider having the least amount of impact, maybe being the worst one, maybe being whatever you would call it, maybe feeling like a waste of money, to be honest. So that's essentially it. If you guys have any questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.